You know what's funny about desperation? It makes you do things you never thought possible. Picture this. It's 2025, and the Philippines is sitting in the dark. Not metaphorically, literally. Rolling blackouts across Manila. Factories shutting down. Hospitals running on generators. The fifth largest economy in Southeast Asia, and we can't keep the lights on. And here's the kicker. Everyone knows the solution. Everyone's known it for years. Solar panels stretching across Luzon. Wind turbines dancing along the coastlines. Geothermal plants tapping into the Pacific Ring of Fire that we've been sitting on this whole time. The Philippines has enough renewable energy potential to power itself 3 times over. 3 times. So why are we still burning coal imported from halfway across the world? Because of a word that makes every finance minister break out in cold sweats. Money. More specifically, $10 billion. That's what it would take to build what energy experts are calling the Philippine Renewable Energy Corridor, a massive infrastructure project that could finally break the country's addiction to fossil fuels and foreign dependency. $10 billion to transform the entire energy landscape of a nation. Now, traditionally, when a developing country needs $10 billion for infrastructure, there's been one phone number everyone calls. Beijing. China's Belt and Road Initiative has been writing checks all across Asia, building ports, highways, power plants. Need a dam? China's got you. Need a railway? China's your guy. And the terms seem simple. We'll build it, you pay us back, everyone's happy. Except it's never that simple, is it? Because here's what nobody tells you about taking money from powerful neighbors. Debt isn't just about interest rates and repayment schedules. Debt is leverage. Debt is influence. Debt is having someone else's hand on your country's steering wheel. Sri Lanka learned this the hard way when they couldn't pay back their Chinese loans and had to hand over an entire port for 99 years. 99 years. That's not a loan. That's colonialism with a contract. And the Philippines? We're already walking a tightrope. We've got territorial disputes in the South China Sea. We've got fishing rights being challenged. We've got military tensions that flare up every other month. The last thing we need is to owe our largest geopolitical rival 10 billion reasons to tell us what to do. So here's the impossible question facing the country right now. How do you build a $10 billion renewable energy corridor without Chinese debt? And before you click away thinking this is just another boring economics video, stick with me. Because this story has everything. Political chess matches, billionaire environmentalists, a former president who built his career on infrastructure, secret meetings in Abu Dhabi, and one absolutely wild solution that nobody saw coming. But first, let me tell you why this matters to you, even if you've never set foot in Southeast Asia. Because what's happening in the Philippines right now? It's a test case for the entire developing world. Dozens of countries are watching this moment, asking themselves the same question. Can we develop without debt traps? Can we go green without going broke? Can we build the future without mortgaging it? The answer to that question will reshape global power dynamics for the next 50 years. No pressure, right? Now, my mom told me I'd never hit 5,000 subscribers talking about stuff like this. She said, who wants to watch videos about energy policy and geopolitics? And you know what? Maybe she's right. But I believe there are 5,000 people out there who understand that the most interesting stories aren't about superheroes and fantasy worlds. They're about real people trying to solve impossible problems in the real world. So if you're one of those people, if this is exactly the kind of story you want to hear more of, hit that subscribe button right now and prove her wrong. Let's get to 5,000 together and show her that smart, curious people still exist on the internet. All right, back to the Philippines and their $10 billion problem. Let me paint you a picture of what energy looks like in the country right now. The Philippines pays some of the highest electricity rates in Asia. Like, ridiculously high. Manila residents are paying almost triple what people in Bangkok pay. Small businesses are getting crushed by power bills. Manufacturing companies are choosing to build factories in Vietnam instead because energy costs are killing their margins. And it's not just expensive, it's unreliable. During the summer months when demand spikes, the grid can't handle it. Brownouts become routine. In some provinces, electricity is rationed like it's a precious resource, which, I guess, it kind of is. Here's why. The Philippines still gets about 60% of its power from fossil fuels. Coal, natural gas, imported oil. Every single day, ships are pulling into Manila Bay loaded with coal from Indonesia and Australia. The country is literally burning money, foreign currency, to keep the lights on. And that money is leaving the economy forever. enriching coal exporters while Filipinos sweat through blackouts. Meanwhile, the sun is blasting down on those same islands 300 days a year. The wind is whipping across thousands of miles of coastline. The entire country sits on top of some of the most active geothermal resources on the planet. It's like living in a warehouse full of food while paying premium prices to import meals from overseas. The irony is painful. So about 5 years ago, a coalition of energy experts, environmentalists, and surprisingly, several business tycoons came together with a plan. They called it the Philippine Renewable Energy Corridor. The idea was elegant in its simplicity: build a connected network of solar farms in the north, wind installations along the coasts, geothermal plants tapping into volcanic activity, and a modernized grid to connect it all. The math was compelling. Initial investment, $10 billion. Annual savings on fuel imports, roughly $4 billion. Meaning the project would pay for itself in under 3 years, and after that, the Philippines would have essentially free, clean, renewable energy forever. Forever. Plus, it would create 100,000 jobs during construction. It would establish the Philippines as a green energy hub in Southeast Asia. It would reduce carbon emissions by 80 million tons annually. Every metric looked good. Except for that pesky $10 billion price tag. The government didn't have it. International development banks were interested but couldn't fund the whole thing. Private investors wanted guarantees that the government couldn't provide. And the one entity that could write a check tomorrow and start construction next week? The China Development Bank, backed by the Belt and Road Initiative. And that's where the story gets interesting. Because the president at the time, let's call him President Infrastructure, since his entire brand was built on building things, he was actually leaning toward taking the Chinese deal. From a pure construction standpoint, it made sense. China had the experience, the technology, the speed. They'd built similar projects across Africa and Asia. They could probably have solar panels installed before the ink dried on the contract. But then something unexpected happened. The fishing communities spoke up. See, the Philippines has thousands of small fishing villages that depend on the South China Sea for their livelihood. And these communities had been getting squeezed for years by Chinese vessels operating in disputed waters, backed by their Coast Guard. These weren't hypothetical geopolitical tensions. These were fishermen coming home with empty nets because Chinese boats had already swept through, or worse, being chased away from fishing grounds their families had used for generations. And these fishing communities did the math in a different way. They said, "You're going to take billions from China for solar panels while they're stealing billions worth of fish from our waters? You're going to make us dependent on Chinese infrastructure while we're fighting over territory? Are you insane?" The grassroots opposition was fierce. Protests, social media campaigns, petitions. And here's what made it powerful: it wasn't ideological. These weren't activists with political agendas. These were ordinary people saying, "We can't afford this kind of dependency." The momentum shifted. President Infrastructure started looking for alternatives. And this is where our story takes a turn into genuine international intrigue. Behind the scenes, Philippine economic ministers started having quiet conversations with Middle Eastern sovereign wealth funds. Specifically, the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority and the Saudi Public Investment Fund. These are some of the wealthiest investment entities on the planet, managing hundreds of billions in assets, and they've been desperately trying to diversify away from oil. Think about the irony there. Countries that got rich from fossil fuels now investing in renewable energy. But it makes perfect sense. They know the oil age is ending, and they need to get ahead of that transition. So the pitch to Abu Dhabi and Riyadh was clever. You want to be leaders in the green transition? Fund the first major renewable corridor in Southeast Asia. Get in on the ground floor. Show the world that Gulf money is building the future, not just extracting the past. But Middle Eastern investors aren't charities. They wanted returns. Real returns. That's when someone had a genuinely brilliant idea, and I wish I knew who to credit for this because it's the kind of creative problem-solving that deserves recognition. The proposal was this: structure the renewable energy corridor not as a government debt project, but as a private-public revenue-sharing partnership. The Gulf funds would finance construction in exchange for a percentage of energy sales for 20 years. The Philippine government would maintain ownership and control, but investors would get steady returns from electricity revenue. Here's why this was genius. It aligned everyone's incentives. The investors wanted the project to succeed because their returns depended on it actually working. The government wanted it to succeed because they'd own transformative infrastructure. Consumers would benefit from stable, cheaper electricity. and nobody had to surrender sovereignty or strategic leverage. But there was still a problem. 10 billion is a lot, even for Gulf sovereign wealth funds who need to justify investments to their boards. They needed proof of concept, some demonstration that this wasn't just fantasy economics. So the Philippine government did something smart. They started small. Using a combination of development bank loans and domestic investment, they built a pilot project in Ilocos Norte, a northern province with strong winds and abundant sunshine. 500 megawatts of combined solar and wind capacity, connected to a modernized regional grid. And it worked. Better than projected, actually. Energy costs in the region dropped by 40% within 18 months. Reliability improved dramatically. The installation created thousands of local jobs. Suddenly, renewable energy wasn't theoretical. It was powering real homes and businesses. That pilot project became the proof of concept that Gulf investors needed. By late 2024, Abu Dhabi Investment Authority committed $4 billion to the broader corridor project. The Saudi Public Investment Fund added another $2.5 billion. The Asian Development Bank, seeing the momentum, came in with $1.5 billion in concessional loans. Japanese companies, smelling opportunity, invested another $1 billion in exchange for technology contracts. Just like that, the $10 billion gap started closing. Without a single yuan from Beijing. But building the financing was only half the battle. Actually constructing this thing? That's where the real challenge began. Because here's what nobody tells you about renewable energy infrastructure. It's complicated. You're not just planting solar panels in a field and calling it a day. You're integrating multiple energy sources with different output patterns. Solar produces during the day. Wind peaks at night and during storms. Geothermal provides steady baseload power. You need a smart grid that can balance all of this in real time, storage systems to handle fluctuations, and transmission lines to move power from where it's generated to where it's needed. The Philippines is an archipelago, 7,000 islands. You can't just run power lines across water like you can across land. Underwater cables are exponentially more expensive and technically challenging. So the engineering teams got creative. They designed the corridor as a series of regional hubs rather than one centralized system. Luzon, the largest island, would have its own integrated network. Visayas in the center would be another hub. Mindanao in the south would be a third. Each region would be self-sufficient, but with interconnections for load balancing. Construction started in early 2025. And here's where the story gets human. Because massive infrastructure projects aren't built by governments or investment funds. They're built by people. Thousands of workers, many from the same communities that would benefit from the electricity. Engineers from Manila working alongside technicians from rural provinces. International consultants training local teams. There's this one story I love. A woman named Maria Elena, a single mother from Pangasinan, got hired as a solar panel installer after a 3-month training program. She'd never held a job outside of small-scale farming before. Within a year, she was leading a team of 20 installers, and her salary had tripled her previous income. She told a reporter, "I'm building the thing that will power my children's future." How many people get to say that about their job? Multiply that story by 100,000, and you start to understand the human scale of what's happening. But it hasn't been smooth sailing. There have been delays, cost overruns, technical setbacks. A major wind installation in Baton's was damaged by a typhoon and had to be rebuilt with stronger foundations. Some communities initially opposed projects, worried about land use and environmental impact, requiring negotiations and design changes. Corruption scandals erupted around procurement contracts, leading to investigations and firings. This is real life, not a Hollywood script where everything works perfectly. Yet despite the challenges, the project kept moving forward. And as of right now, in January 2026, the Philippine Renewable Energy Corridor is about 40% complete. 2 gigawatts of new renewable capacity is already online and feeding into the grid. Energy imports have dropped by 15%. Electricity prices in connected regions have fallen by an average of 25%. It's actually happening. But here's the question that keeps energy analysts up at night. What happens when the 20-year revenue-sharing agreement with Gulf investors ends? Because that's the thing about creative financing. It solves today's problem but creates tomorrow's questions. In 20 years, will the Philippines have the economic strength to buy out investor stakes and assume full ownership? Will they want to extend the partnerships? Will new investors want in? And there's the geopolitical dimension. China didn't just shrug and walk away when the Philippines chose a different path. they've been quietly funding competing projects in neighboring countries. Vietnam, Indonesia, Malaysia, building their own renewable networks, extending influence, creating dependencies. Some analysts call this the new energy Cold War, a competition not over oil fields, but over who controls the infrastructure of the green transition. And the Philippines just became ground zero. So here's where we are. A country that was told its only option was debt diplomacy, with its most powerful rival found another way. Not a perfect way, not an easy way, but a way that preserved sovereignty while building the future. And other countries are watching. Pakistan is studying the Philippine model. Kenya is in talks with similar investor groups. Bangladesh is exploring hybrid financing for solar projects. The playbook is being written in real time. Because here's what this story is really about. It's about whether developing countries can chart their own course in the 21st century, whether they can develop without surrendering leverage, whether the future has to look like the past, with great powers dictating terms to smaller nations. The Philippine Renewable Energy Corridor is an answer to that question. Not the only answer, maybe not even the best answer, but an answer. And that matters, because energy is everything. It's not just about keeping lights on. It's about powering hospitals and schools. It's about creating industrial capacity and economic opportunity. It's about dignity and self-determination. When you control your energy future, you control your future, period. The Philippines is betting $10 billion and its next generation's prosperity that you can build that future without compromising who you are. Time will tell if they're right. But right now, in thousands of communities across those islands, solar panels are converting sunlight into electricity. Wind turbines are spinning in coastal breezes. Geothermal plants are tapping into the Earth's heat. And families like Maria Elena's are going to sleep with lights on, powered by resources they own, financed by partnerships they chose. That's not everything, but it's something. And sometimes, something is enough to change everything.